And that's why sometimes I get worried. I've looked into how South Africa is trying to organize itself. We seem to give the impression that the G20 would bring a lot of benefit to a lot of people. It's unlikely to do that. That we have this high debt, high opulence. You have people who are actually having much more than the ordinary people. So essentially, we have a lot of gluttons in this society.
Indeed.
So statistics about a hunger in the Eastern Cape.
Malnutrition. Children are dying of malnutrition.
Dying of malnutrition. In this day and age, then you ask yourself, when we have so much that we could feed those who don't have anything, and yet we are unable to do that. Well, I see economists are arguing that for us to have an impact to deal with poverty, the economy must at least grow at about 6%. I saw now we were celebrating the growth of 1.0%.
Yes, because they had predicted 0.8, but we made it 1, so, yes.
I mean, I still find it very difficult to hear political parties celebrating that you have 18 million people who are on social grant. That's not a measure of success. The absence of strategic leadership within our country is the biggest problem. We have 3.9 billion rand paid to ghost workers a year.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the EFF podcast. My name is Lebohang Mujapelu, and I'm your host for today. The topic for today that we have is the G20 and South Africa's battle for geopolitical relevance. We are questioning, as the G20 is coming up, there are many things occurring right now in the East and the West in relation to South Africa, and we are wondering what is the significance of the G20 in the overall geopolitical stance and positioning that South Africa has taken, particularly over the past year. Joining me is international relations expert and a former diplomat, Dr. Kingsley Makhubela. He's a seasoned South African diplomat and former public servant with a distinguished career in international relations and government, holding a master's degree in diplomatic studies and a PhD from political studies at the University of Pretoria. He started within the ANC as a head of security. He has served as ambassador to Portugal and then eventually as high commissioner to Kenya from South Africa. So his experience is quite extensive. Currently, he is director at Risk Recon, where he works as a risk analyst and public relations executive. Additionally, he has acted as a special envoy for South Africa and generally contributes to discussions on topics like international relations, which is why we have him here today. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Makhubela. I'm excited to have you in the studio as we are coming up the next month, where South Africa is hosting the G20 meeting. And obviously the first time we're doing so, right?
First time.
It is the first time that
South Africa is hosting.
It is, yes. And South Africa, as the only permanent African member of the G20 since 2023, this is, it hasn't been that long. It's been almost 2 years of us being a permanent member. We're hosting everyone. And there is still some things happening in the background around America. Is Trump going to make it? Are they, willing to be part of the G20 in South Africa? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think America is going to join us?
Lebo, South Africa has been an integral part of the G20 since it was formed.
Yes.
The initial focus of the G20 was on critical issues of finance, and triggered, of course, by the global finance crisis in Asia, and realizing how integrated is the global finance system. And the 20 biggest economy were then invited. And you ask yourself, why was South Africa invited? Because South Africa doesn't fall in the category of biggest economy.
Yes.
If you look at the economies that are within the G20, they are, in their $1 trillion GDP. South Africa is the only one that we're running. I think our GDP now is about 400 and something billion dollars. So it's the smallest economy. But they understand that South Africa carries the influence and the aspiration of most African countries. And that's why eventually we were there. It would have been unacceptable to find the whole world meeting to discuss global finance and the African continent is not there. And I think there was a sensitivity to that effect. Yeah. So now the hosting, different countries have been hosting, it rotates. And this time the rotation comes to South Africa. And the host countries, they usually determine the agenda of what the issues they are likely to raise. And they develop the theme. And this theme, you remember the previous host was Brazil.
Yes.
So we worked with the Brazilians as South Africa to develop the theme for South Africa and also the focus area for South Africa. If you look at the theme for South Africa, it has to do with global solidarity, it has to do with sustainability, and it has to do with issues of equality, which runs contrary to the Americans' view about how they see the world. So this hosting by South Africa, it provides a good opportunity for focus on the African continent. I know South Africa is trying to include a lot of issues that are not related to global finance, and that's where the resistance is. I know, even when I was in government, there's been an intention at one stage to expand this, but there have been countries, particularly the developed countries, have been very reluctant that this should be a gathering of ministers of finance and governors of the reserve banks. That's how they see this. So South Africa hosting, what are the potentials? What are the spin-offs? Of course, the biggest focus will be on the country in terms of being able to organize major events, and particularly an event that includes big powers in terms of the military, the finance. So, but South Africa has the capacity and the capability to host big events. So would we be able to pull out a consensus agreement? I think the jury's out on that level.
Okay, it's interesting that you mentioned then how the importance of South Africa within the G20, particularly creating a bridge between almost like two different worlds, between these biggest economies and the African continent, and this push by South Africa to shift the focus away from, like you said, banking and financial strategies, and to actually be focusing on creating a different kind of world. I'm wondering, is that something that is possible within the G20? Will the G20 ever be able to really shift towards anything that is beneficial to the rest of the world, other than the countries that are within that top 20 themselves?
You know, as I said, the formation of the G20 was the realization and recognition that there's a lot of interdependence, because when the finance crisis happened in Asia, affected the global financial system. So that recognition is what brings South Africa to the table. Would South Africa be able to expand on that? There's been a pushback in the past, and this pushback is continuing. That there are other related multilateral fora where these issues are being discussed. This should not come to the G20. And that's why sometimes I get worried. I've looked into how South Africa is trying to organize itself. We seem to give the impression that the G20 would bring a lot of benefit to a lot of people. It's unlikely to do that. It's basically a very good discussion about the health financial system of the world that must be managed. And I was a bit worried when Brazil did not discuss, amongst other issues, the question of the global debt. When Brazil was hosting that time, the global debt was standing at 300 trillion US dollars. Sometimes last year, the global debt has gone to 317 trillion US dollars. Now, understand this in context. The global economy, it may have shrunk a little bit now, was about 100 trillion. That's the global GDP. Now, you realize the amount of debt that we are, all of us, that we are passing to the next generation. the global economy grew in the last 4 years by about 17 trillion, but the 17 trillion went direct into the debt.
Yes.
It's how to manage this global debt. And this global debt, it's not very helpful to developing countries and small countries and highly indebted countries. And when South Africa started to make pronouncement about dealing with the global debt, I thought it's the most welcome thing. That's why people are trying to say, but the Americans, even if they don't attend the G20, we can have a discussion. Remember, out of this 317 trillion, Americans are having about 37 trillion US dollars in terms of debt. They're highly indebted.
Yes.
So you have to manage that. Their participation in the discussion of how to manage the global debt is very important because they remain a very big economy, but they have the highest global debt that is there. And if you look out of that level, the global debt, I think the debt that is owed by government, it was about 117 trillion out of the 300 trillion. But the rest of the debt is what me and you owe, what the students owe. So this debt is calculated, the credit card that
this is everybody.
Everybody.
From top to bottom, from institution
Everyone.
to government
Absolutely.
to individuals. Yeah. How do we get to that point? Perhaps maybe I won't be the only ignorant one. Maybe our viewers would like to know. How do we get to a point where collectively as a world we owe that much? And who do we owe? If everyone owes, who do we owe? And how do we get to a point where collectively as the globe we owe that much?
I mean, take South Africa, for instance. In 2009, our debt was so small. But I think now our debt is the highest. We can't, even in terms of servicing the debt, we can't service the interest. So that's where the big problem is. We are borrowing that money. That's where the big problem is. Take a country like France. France, its GDP is about $3.6 trillion. But they owe 113% its debt. So double of what they can produce. And that's why you're seeing this instability building up in France, the collapse of the government in the last 3 weeks because the government wanted to come up with austerity measures to try to reduce the debt. That's where governments then get involved in terms of keeping on borrowing. Then you have ordinary people that are borrowing and the economy that is not growing, like me and you. We borrow the money to build our houses. We borrow the money to take our kids to school, and we're unable to service that debt. So we owe a certain amount of money to the banks and so on. So that's where this debt, it's spread across the board. And I hope the G20 this time around will discuss how to manage this debt. You have highly indebted countries and that are very poor. And that's why you're seeing instability. Take, for instance, what happened in Nepal in the last few weeks. I mean, it's because of the debt, but it's compounded also by the corruption that is going on. Which is the same problem that we have here.
Yes, exactly.
That we have this high debt, high opulence. You have people who are actually having much more than the ordinary people. So essentially, we have a lot of gluttons in this society.
Indeed.
And you have people who don't have food. I mean, look at, I saw statistics about hunger in the Eastern Cape.
Malnutrition. Children are dying of malnutrition.
Dying of malnutrition. In this day and age, then you ask yourself, when we have so much that we could feed those who don't have anything, and yet we're unable to do that. And this thing keeps on shrinking. The poor keep on being left in the periphery, and the rich keep on getting very rich. And that's why you see the resentment towards politicians is because the political life, it's better for politicians. But for ordinary people, it's a huge challenge. So this distribution of that it's a huge challenge.
It is a huge challenge. So I want to then, what is this relationship, I think, maybe to make it more clear, the relationship between this high indebtedness and austerity measures? Because we're seeing it a lot in South Africa. I mean, the National Treasury is really pushing a lot of reduced spending, trying to reduce civil service, trying to, to say that, oh, we have a lot of debt that we need to service, so we need to just spend less on everything. At the same time, the poor are getting poorer, and you have people dying of extreme poverty. What is that relationship between austerity and debt, and are we managing it the best way we can, globally and in South Africa as well?
There's a debate currently in the country that the mandate of the Reserve Bank should include both the management of the inflation, and there are people who are saying it must be balanced against the job creation to ensure that there's an absorption. So that's where the big problem is. But the austerity measures, it's a shortcut to reduce the amount of money. I'm saying our borrowing, the interest we are paying is not enough to service the debt, let alone paying the debt. Meaning that the debt keeps on increasing as we are struggling to pay the interest to service that debt. And it keeps on ballooning. And that's where the big problem is. And then the government will then opt to say we have to cut certain social services. Now, with a country as diverse as South Africa, and the Gini coefficient of the country that is so high, it means those who are left out will keep on being left out. And the unfortunate thing is that in the South African context, poverty has a color. So the majority of black people will keep on being left out because they are starting from scratch. That's where the big challenge is, to start cutting down on the social safety network.
Yes.
And that's where the French are trying to do. I mean, the French tried to cut down 56 billion US dollars. And that's why the government failed, because the demand keeps on rising and the population keeps on growing, in our case at least. So we're going to run into this problem. I think it's going to be a huge challenge. It's essentially asking... the government is going to find out it's going to be very difficult to square the triangle.
Yes, definitely.
It's a huge challenge.
So for us, going back to the G20 and what South Africa is trying to do this year, I'm wondering, with the way relations have gone between South Africa and America, and the South Africa also needing, the BRICS has expanded. It's now including other countries, UAE, Iran, all of that. And so there are new commitments, the commitments and the connections between South Africa and other nations is growing. Do you think we have the ability to balance the commitments we have between BRICS and those countries, not just the ones, we started with, and the growth, and something like G20? Are we caught between competing giants like China, Russell, and the USA, or are we going to be able to stand our own and get exactly what we need and require from these big organizations?
Well, the fortunate part is that within the G20, you have the Russian Federation, you have China, you have India, you have Brazil, who are also part of the BRICS. Even though Saudi Arabia is still on the fence, Saudi Arabia is part of the G20. So you have that like-minded countries in terms of dealing with issues of the global south or financial needs of the global south. You would have seen the speech of the president at the General Assembly. He's speaking about the global finance. I don't think global finance is going to work out. What it's needed actually in some of these economies is to close the gap in terms of the wastage and the corruption that is going on. Not only here, I think the Chinese are doing very well in terms of money managing corruption within government. We've been very poor in terms of how we manage corruption and how we deal with the leakages that are created by corruptions. I think we have like-minded countries in terms of that. But in terms of the viability of the financial institutions, you would recall that about 8-10 years ago, the health of the financial system in South Africa, we were ranked like number 5 in the whole world. And I think last time I checked, we went down to number 12. I don't know where we are now in terms of systems and processes and independence of the system, the financial system. But the problem is that this financial system has been insulated. It excludes a large number of people. I mean, if you poke some holes into our financial institution and access to finance, you're going to realize that this question of people of color have no easy access for startup to have access to finance and so on. And that's where the big demand is. But I think as the state, if South Africa was to close the gaps, the loopholes, would do much better. I mean,
so you're saying essentially that even if we were to be lucratively engaging globally within the financial institutions, getting more free trade, getting more access to different kinds of funding and all of that, that it would not necessarily make a difference for the ordinary South African because of...
Well, I see economists are arguing that for us to have an impact to deal with poverty, the economy must at least grow at about 6%. I saw now we were celebrating the growth of 1.0%.
Yes, because they had predicted 0.8, but we made it 1, so, you know.
It was a big celebration for 1%. But that 1% growth is not changing the needle. So to change the needle, you need to get this growth. And to get this growth, you are then going to be able to absorb a lot of people in the work market. And the need for austerity measures would disappear.
Yes.
I mean, I still find it very difficult to hear political parties celebrating that you have 18 million people who are on social grant. That's not a measure of success. The social grants, how much people get, it's quite bad. But, people say it's better than nothing. But you're not going to make a big dent in dealing with issues of poverty. To be able to do that, the measure, I think everyone agrees, is to get people out of the social grant, to be on their own. But as long as the economy is not doing well, there's no absorption into the job market. I mean, look at what happened in Nepal.
Yeah.
Nepal unemployment, it's 10%. But people...
And it was enough for people to revolt, yes, indeed.
The unemployment of young people in Nepal is 20% of young people. Here, unemployment is 30%. And unemployment of young people is even much higher.
It's higher than that, yes.
And that's why when people are saying we're sitting on a ticking bomb, they're quite correct. Because the communication space has changed, the manner in which young people communicate with each other. We can't bequeath to young generation poverty. And we're living now large at the expense of future generation. It's unsustainable.
No, it is not unsustainable. And I mean, we've seen very distinct political shifts on the continent as well, particularly in West and Central Africa over the past few years. Countries like Burkina Faso who are, taking a stand and distinctly choosing, to expel France across different countries. And they're trying to, it's clear that there's something that they're trying to do in terms of recreating their own independence on a financial level. Do you think that there's something to look to there?
Well, what happened in West Africa, particularly with Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali,
yes,
is a military takeover.
Yes.
But there are concrete conditions that one has to look into them and really look at what are the root causes of this military takeover. It's easier for everyone to say, well, the Constitutive Act of the African Union does not allow unconstitutional takeover of government. But if you look at some of the dynamics there, and people are saying that at one stage in France, the finances of this country are linked to France.
Yes.
The treasurer has no independence.
No.
So there's some level of neo-colonialism that
definitely.
people have decided to revolt against them. And if you look at people who are revolting this military takeover, these are young people. And they are affected by things that are happening in the society. But if you look at the detailed dynamics of the root causes of this conflict, that's what needs to be addressed, rather than looking at the conflict in totality. And I realized in the last two days, the 3 countries in West Africa have decided also to move out of the International Criminal Court.
Oh, wow. Yes, of course.
So they are really shaking the old establishment because the ICC, to a large extent, of course, it's true what they are raising.
Yes,
it has been targeting all black people, poor countries, but rich countries, no one goes after them. I mean, people have admitted that the war in Iraq was based on false premises. Have they been indicted for that?
No, there's nothing.
Nothing has happened. So there's double standard that is being applied. But I think what is required, Lebo, it's a detailed diagnosis of the problem to ensure that military coups do not happen. Address those.
Yeah. So it is, I mean, I do understand like the root causes, especially, neocolonization. And France has, been one of the worst offenders in this regard. And that sometimes in these ways, because countries like France, America, Britain, they also maintain their own leaders within these spaces who they support and ways of maintaining certain policies, so that military coups can seem to be essential, the only way that any form of freedom can happen. But is that our only way? Is there no other way we can, because then it becomes difficult to hold our leaders accountable or to balance the risk of extreme political leadership, where people no longer have rights and people, and because we're maintaining leaders that are not democratically elected.
Lebu, and as a student of conflict resolution, I'm not a fan of military takeover. And I think we should try to persuade a lot of countries not to opt for that, instead to build institutions of democracy. And let these institutions be very resilient and to precisely resist poor leadership that exists. I mean, I was quite impressed in Malawi that in the last 2 days that President Mutharika has come back to office against Chakwera. Now Chakwera has conceded defeat. I think that's how it should be, instead of a military takeover. But I think we need. I'm the last person to judge what happened in West Africa, but I don't think what happened in West Africa, it's the best barometer to measure the Africans' resistance to wrong things by leaders. I think there are other options that we could look at.
That is very interesting, particularly when we're speaking about, the withdrawal from the ICC, which makes sense because, like you said, they're often targeted. But also, it's also like, what are you preparing for? What plans do you have for these people where certain layers of accountability are no longer welcome? But speaking of the ICC, we have the UN Commission finally declaring last week that Israel's actions in Gaza are indeed genocide. What does this mean for South Africa, as a country that has been the leading voice of justice in terms of Israel? but also what have been the consequences of South Africa standing up and pushing this forward?
You know, excuse me, the pronouncement by the International Commission that has been tasked to investigate issues of human rights abuses and the violation of the Geneva Convention on Human Rights. It's a three-man or three-persons panel that has one Australian, one Indian, and is chaired by Navi Pillay.
Pillay, yeah.
Their findings are quite worrisome. One of the things that they are raising in their 72-page report, they're raising this question that Israel went to attack and destroy a fertility clinic in Gaza. And that fertility clinic had 4,000 embryos and 1,000 sperms and eggs. Now, if that is fighting terrorism, really to fight terrorists at that early age, it tells you that there's a clear intention to totally deal with the Palestinian as a people,
yes,
as a religious group, as a particular ethnic group. And that in terms of the Convention on Genocide, it entirely fits within that. If you look at their argument, they're making very strong and compelling argument around that. So that makes sense. But the challenge of that commission is that it doesn't speak on behalf of the United Nations. It was set up by the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, and it has no legal standing to speak on behalf of the United Nations. But you may ask a question, then why do they conduct this? The credibility of somebody like Judge Niva Pillay is that she's conducted similar investigation in Rwanda, highly respected, same as her counterpart from Australia and India. They're highly respected. The one from India is actually an expert in terms of human settlement. And they have very good credibility in terms of dealing with this thing. I think it has given some impetus to this argument that there's genocide going on. It's now something that can't be ignored. The civil society is rising, particularly in the developed North. You've seen the changes to start recognizing the state of Palestine. In my own view, I don't think it's the willingness of political leaders to do that. It's because of civil society pressure within those governments. We've seen huge demonstrations taking place
across the world,
in Italy, and so on. So people are rising up to say, this can't happen during our lifetime. So that's where the pressure is. But I think it gives credence to South African argument that there's genocide going on. But the ICJ still needs to arbitrate around that. They have to look at the merits of it.
And I think that's perhaps one of the frustrating things around the issue of Palestine and Gaza, that even like you're stating that even this commission does not really speak on behalf of the UN, we are still waiting for the ICJ to arbitrate, as you say. We have, there was what do you call it? The ICC did issue a warrant of arrest, but still there hasn't been much happening. And as much as certain countries have stated that they recognize Palestine, there is still nothing being done to stop Israel. Are they ever going to be stopped, do you think?
The momentum is shifting, I must say, even within the United States. The recent move by Netanyahu and the far right element within government, like Ben Gvir, and who's the Minister of Security, and Smotrich, who is the Minister of Finance, for the annexation of the West Bank in its entirety. It's really hardening positions, because then it kills the idea of the two-state solutions. Because the two-state, like we're talking in terms of Palestine, you're talking about the West Bank, you're talking about Jerusalem and Gaza. That's what constitutes that. Now, they are now, as we are talking, launching a ferocious attack on Gaza.
Yes.
To clean up Gaza.
Completely.
The Israelis.
Yeah.
Not only that, but to erase even the memory of Gaza.
Yes,
destroy
indeed.
houses. So that people who move out of there, they can't go and say, this was my house. So they're erasing every memory around that. So it's a huge challenge. But the pressure it's creating for the Netanyahu government is quite immense. The United States lawmakers are divided. A large number of them, they are of the view that the two-state solution is the best option. There are those who think that a one-state solution is the best. So it's creating new challenges for the Americans. The two-state solution has been accepted by the United Nations. Remember when the State of Israel was created in 1948, actually 56% of what used to be called mandatory Palestine, which was controlled by the British, 56% was going to be the State of Israel.
Yes.
43% was going to be the Palestinian state. 1% was Jerusalem, was going to be under the control of the international community. But since the conflict, particularly the 1967 conflict, Israel occupies, as we are talking now, more than 78% of what used to be Palestine. So it's a huge challenge. It's creating a lot of problem around the world. Countries are standing up. That's why part of the countries that are starting to recognize the state of Palestine is the resentment to the total obliteration of the Palestinian state. And I think Netanyahu is not going to win on that. He will remain isolated. There are efforts now to isolate Israel. UEFA, which is the Football Federation, wants to expel. Countries like Ireland have taken stands. Countries like Spain have started to take stand to impose sanctions. Countries like Colombia, they've started to stop shipment of their coal there. Ironically, the Republic of South Africa still sends coal.
It does,
to
indeed.
Israel. I think they also need to take a stand around those issues. If really, indeed, there's a pressure they want to put. I want to clarify one thing, like that a lot of people have misinterpreted my views in the past. Even though I think a stand must be taken against the state of Israel, I don't think for South Africa to cut completely diplomatic relation with state of Israel, it's prudent.
Okay, take me down this thinking.
I think if we understand diplomacy as a statecraft, it's a battlefield. Diplomacy is statecraft, and that we need to fight the Israelis using all necessary means to advocate what South Africa stands for. That requires this diplomatic engagement with Israel. If you have a diplomatic relations with Israel, South Africa will continue to engage with civil society in Israel. There are a lot of civil society people who are actually not supporting this. I was reading a report that was written, I think, on the 22 of this month. A very comprehensive report of what's going on. It's written by 8 academics. Very detailed report. But it's based on them talking to different people within Israel. And their conclusion, actually, is that what Israel is doing there is repugnant. It's something that we should not fold our arms on it. What are you going to do if you don't have diplomatic missions? Unless you don't understand the diplomatic statecraft. And as a student of diplomacy...
So what is the diplomatic intervention that South Africa could do then? If we're saying we're not breaking ties, what role will they play, and how effective do you think it would be?
How would South Africa understand? Ask yourself the question the other way around. How would South Africa understand the dynamics and measure the temperature within Israel without the diplomatic presence in Israel?
All right.
That's what is going to... Without information. Remember, the diplomat, if you go to the old definition of diplomat, they're saying a diplomat, it's actually a celebrated spy.
Okay.
So if you are a diplomat, you collect information on the ground. on behalf of your government. So you are basically a diplomat, a glorified spy. And that's how you allow your government to make informed decision. And informed decision can't be based on hearsay, on reading newspapers, must be based on direct engagement, not only with government, because diplomacy has evolved.
No, yeah.
It includes civil society, organization, a lot of influential individuals. You can only do that if you have a diplomatic presence. If you don't have that, you're denying yourself of the access to understand those issues. You deny yourself of this barometer to measure the temperature within the Israeli society.
Within that space.
Absolutely.
Particularly if we are concerned about Palestine and Gaza, and that we could actually then be able to actually inform other interventions simply because of our presence there and seeing and even be able to predict.
Remember, it's not only us there, there are other missions that are there.
Exactly.
You engage with them.
All right.
Yeah.
I completely understand that. So speaking of this now, we have the situation recently where the chief of the South African National Defense Forces goes to Iran. There is a whole thing around it, and even the president denies, like, oh, it was he was not sanctioned to do so. He comes back and there's his own minister then, and she says, no, but this was a mission that was set up already last year, and it is something that is routine, and it is something that we do as countries that relate with each other. Please explain to me what this thing was. Why is there conflict between the president and his own minister? And is it really possible for the chief of an army to go somewhere without sanction from their own president?
Let's go back a little bit on that subject. When this thing first surfaced in the newspaper, it was run by the South African media. To say he was in Iran and he pledged solidarity with Iran to work with the Iranians. The Ministry of Defense issued a statement repudiating him. And I read in the newspapers where he even conveyed best wishes from the president, from his minister, to the president of Iran, and that's what the chief of defense did. And it was repudiated. And I took a back seat. And somebody from DECO went on air to say foreign policy is the prerogative of DECO. They don't know what did the chief of defense.
Yes.
What was quite strange to me at that time was a repudiation of the chief of defense based on media things.
Yes.
And my attitude then was, and I found it very difficult at that stage for the ministry to issue out a statement and not to say, let's wait for the chief of defense to come back and get to understand what's going on. We'll then engage you.
Yes.
He is in Iran and they are repudiating him. And I found it quite difficult. And the presidency also issued out a statement. Vincent Magwenya was saying that, well, the president is going to engage and to understand what's going on. And I was saying to myself, why do you do this?
It's in public. Why is it happening?
He is on the ground.
Yes.
Later on, the Minister of Defense changed position to say, no, this was a long-planned visit. It was approved visit. They were questioning even why did the chief of defense go there? Who approved that? And of course, the president doesn't approve movement of heads of department. It's approved by the minister with the executive authority. And later on, the minister had to retract the statement. But that's not how to treat your chief of defense.
No, that is not.
It was just unfortunate.
Because all of these things are happening in public. And within the press, within the media, even the responses by so they're not even explaining or even they're even having the investigations within the media. We don't know what's going on. How does it look if your own government is admitting that they do not know what's going on within the army?
Not only that, the presidency then said, Foreign Affairs or DEC was asked a question, will there be an action taken against the chief of defense when he comes back? The answer was that, well, we'd expect DECO to defense to deal with that. I mean, there were insinuation of him being punished for being some form of recalcitrant general who went out. And it turned out that he actually went on a mission.
Yes.
I don't know. And that's what I said at that stage when this thing became public knowledge. My view was that we don't even know, maybe we have a a military attaché in Iran. They have an embassy here. We have an embassy in Tehran. We have diplomatic relations. We then started to invite the United States to ask questions. I saw in the news that the American embassy here, to want to find out why did the chief of defense go
to Iran. Yeah.
For goodness sake, we have a diplomatic relations with Iran. We're a sovereign state. The problems that the Americans have with the Iranians is their problem. You know, it's entertaining this extraterritoriality behavior of the United States. And that's what I find it difficult in this country to tell the truth. The other day, not only this, the other day, the wife of the former president, Medvedev, it was reported in the newspapers, the Russian former president, landed in Cape Town. And Cape Town refused to refuel the plane.
Yes.
Because there are sanctions. But those are not South African government. The companies that are here must operate within the legal framework of the Republic of South Africa.
Yes.
If they don't want to do that, they can't operate in that space. So that's where the big challenge is. Now, a ship docks in Cape Town. We're refusing to let people out of the ship because it's a Russian ship. What's going on? Are we a sovereign state?
Or are we an extension of
or
America?
Are we a proxy state of another country? I mean, the Iranians' naval ship made a port of call in Brazil last year. The American made noise about it. The Brazilians said we're a sovereign state. We decide who makes a port of call here. We, at the same time, we have military relations with the United States.
Exactly.
No one worries about that. No one asks questions about that. But military relations with countries that are perceived to be enemies of the United States, they must necessarily be our enemies.
No.
It goes back to Madiba when he said to Americans, don't make your enemies our enemies.
And our allies will remain our allies because of the connections that we've had.
Exactly. We'll decide who is our allies, who's not going to be our ally.
So where do we stand now with this clear, very immense pressure from America? We're to the point where they are even agreeing that there is a genocide happening of white South Africans, where they are playing speeches of Julius Malema in the Oval Office in front of our president, where they are openly talking about sanctioning South Africa or its leaders, where lobby groups like AfriForum are clawing for global sanctions on us, on the EFF president as well. Are we walking into economic and diplomatic isolation from the West simply because, America is not happy with certain decisions we're making? And is our presidency, do we think our current leadership is equipped to deal with the situation that is happening between America and us right now?
Actually, you got it there. The absence of strategic leadership is what is compromising the sovereignty of the Republic. The leadership of this country must not be negotiable, or the sovereignty of this country must not be negotiated. I don't know if you listened to Lula da Silva's statement at the General Assembly on Tuesday when he said the sovereignty of Brazil is not up for any negotiation. No one is going to tell them what to do, what not to do. And I think there's a position that we should take. The problem, we are unable to take a decision informed by our own strategic interests, is because of the poor leadership in the country.
Yes.
And the poor leadership across the board.
Yes.
I mean, I listen sometimes even political debates in parliament, the opposition. Lack of substantive discussion about where the country is going, where the country should go. And there must be things that really are uniting the ruling party and the opposition party in parliament, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, because no one looks after your interests. Foreign policy label, it said, it's a dog-eat-dog situation. If you don't pursue your interests, no one will advocate for your interests. And that's where you see the United States become very united.
Yes.
When the United States soldiers are fighting abroad, it doesn't matter who sent them, they rally behind the soldiers. That's what we need to do. When the general is in Iran, We need to
Yes,
rally
indeed.
behind the general across the political divide, not to start questioning the motive of the general. Now, I saw in the newspapers that the president has had a meeting with the chief of defense, and this matter has been resolved. It's closed. No one was transparent. The president hasn't been transparent about how this matter was resolved. What happened to the allegations made against the general? Because his credibility is basically gone now. We've actually tarnished the credibility of our number one military man.
And we are looking disorganized. We're looking, and also for a military to look like that is not between the commander in chief and his own minister of defense. That looks like a weakness, and we appear very compromised.
But you know, it's what we're starting to see across the system of our government. There's no single voice of communication. Take this issue around the behavior of the Americans towards South Africa. You look at what is communicated by government, what is communicated by the ruling party. There's a cross communication. Some people speak about misinformation, some speak about disinformation. These are two different concepts.
Yes.
And you ask yourself, which is which? And the other one is trying to handle this in diplomatically. The other one goes on a firing tangent. Is that how you manage this? So it seems the left hand doesn't know what is the right hand doing.
No.
At one stage, there's a need to do that. But it's a trend that you see across government, which is the biggest problem. I mean, I was reading an article last week that the ghost workers in South Africa, they cost the state 3.9 trillion.
Billion.
3.9 billion rands. Now, 3.9 billion rand. I was a director general in a national government. When the payroll comes in the department, I used to verify that. But the verification started at the director level, who verify that indeed these people work for me, and they sign off. It comes to the chief director.
They take their people. Everyone signs off on their people.
Happening? How do you have 3.9 billion rands paid to ghost workers a year? And they are saying, the article I saw, they are saying more than that. I just don't understand. It comes to leadership.
Yes.
It's all about leadership.
And which kind of makes some of the questions I wanted to get into a bit redundant, because obviously we are trying to think about how South Africa can leverage its presence in BRICS, in the G20, as you know, in the AU, pushing towards the UN Security Council, IMF, World Bank. But looking at our leadership, I'm not certain if this is now even a significant question to ask. What can we do, and what is needed for us to be able to have a more than nominal presence that can actually make a difference in our world order for South Africa and Africa to benefit within these institutions?
You know, I attended, I've the opportunity to attend two peace and security dialogue hosted by the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. And at those dialogue, what was identified as a critical problem is the absence of strategic leadership within the continent. And I can then say the absence of strategic leadership within our country is the biggest problem. Now, what do I mean by strategic leadership? Leadership that is able to take decisions, however popular, unpopular they may be. Leadership to take decisions against your own. If your own are doing wrong things within government, take a decision. I mean, it's quite disheartening to see how this city that I grew up, Joburg, is going down.
Yes.
And it's going down very fast.
Very quickly.
No water. Sewage very soon will be spilling all over the streets. That requires leadership to arrest that. Why aren't we doing the right thing? The infrastructure development requires leadership. Now, we've allocated in this country close to 1 trillion for the MTF, 1 trillion rand for infrastructure development. Lebo, you can go and dissect that 1 trillion, where it goes and what it's supposed to do. Fixing roads, you can go to those roads, nothing is fixed. That requires leadership to take action. Now, other countries are developing. I mean, the rate at which China is developing is quite scary, because the Chinese take a hardline position towards corruption. We don't. That's where the big problem is. And that requires leadership. That's why in the public service now, you're going to get the majority of people who are remaining there will be people who are tainted. Are people who are allowing this 3.9 trillion ghost workers to go through. Because those who stand up, they're going to push them out.
Yes,
They'll keep on pushing them out. And that's where the big problem is.
Do we, if we want to speak about I want to speak about it briefly, the African Continental Fair Trade Agreement. Am I saying it? I hope I'm getting it. Is there, if in light of like talking once again about leadership and the potential that agreement has, is it possible for that to be a vehicle towards changing something significant within the landscape of our economies in Africa?
You know, the free trade agreement is a good vehicle, because it's the economies of scale that is presented by this, not only in terms of the buying power, but even in terms of bringing the resources of the continents together to bargain with this. This is a new source of power projection in the multipolarity. Because multipolarity is no longer going to be the size of the economy and the military, but it's going to also be your contribution to the global health system, how the entire ecosystem of the world ought to be. Now, if we don't pull this in together, we are doomed. We can't trade as individual partners. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization has tried to pull countries in Asia together to respond to the terrorist issues, and they're having a big impact. If we do that as a continent, we are likely to have very significant impact in terms of trading, even intra-trading. But there are bases that have been laid in the past level. If you look at the Constitutive Act of the African Union, it speaks about the RECs. Are we integrated in the SADC as we talk? Is there any integration in the East African community, in ECOWAS? We are far from that.
No.
You still find countries that are having cross-pollination in terms of affiliation to RECs that are creating problems. And in terms of the Constitutive Act, it says those issues must be phased out. Nothing has been done. So we are far from reaching the dream of a united Africa if we don't deal with these building blocks, which are identified in the Constitutive Act of the African Union. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done around those issues. But what is it required to do that? Leadership.
Yes.
So leadership is required to deal with this issue.
Is there any, like, who would you look at on this continent and imagine or look at and think, okay, there is some good leadership happening there, or good potential of leadership? Because our African leaders are not looking great right now. Some are too old, some are dictators, others are happy very much creating chaos in other African countries as long as they are benefiting. Do we have any examples of what we would consider exemplary leadership in Africa?
I think that there are new leaders that are emerging, in my own view. And I'm looking at a country like Kenya. I've had the privilege to serve as ambassador in Kenya. But I think young people that are in Kenya are taking key strategic decisions.
Yes, indeed.
In terms of the trajectory of their government. And I think their impact will be felt across. And I'm looking at them to provide leadership not only to Kenya, I think they will provide leadership even to us.
Africa,
not in terms
definitely.
of revolting, but in terms of the direction that the continent ought to take. I mean, what happened in Nepal, they've
done it
from the Kenyans.
Yes.
The Kenyans have set a trend. I see the same thing happening in Ghana. The Ghanaian young people are taking action. In this country, the question, are the young people taking the strategic initiative to direct where the country ought to go? I don't see that here. I don't see young people taking active role about where the country ought to go. Young people have been consumed in the political divisions that exist within the country without identifying where we need to channel the people. Take simple issues like issues of ethnicity in this country, issues of tribalism.
Yes.
I don't see young people taking active role about those issues that are so divisive, that have the potential to tear us apart. I hope maybe the generation that is coming up now, they would take some concrete action in terms of building this unity.
Building it, and it's their country. It's theirs, and I think it's very clear that they're not inheriting anything substantial at this point. So they're going to have to fight for it, I think.
They have to define what is it they need to do to deal with this problem. Fortunately, they will not carry the burden of racism that all of us are carrying, because we come from the past with it, of tribalism. They don't see each other in terms of that. They are much more integrated. Maybe they would take action to say, let this thing stop.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Just to round this up, what are you looking forward to the G20? What should we be thinking about? What should our leadership be thinking about and approaching the G20 with?
Well, I think this is my biggest fear. My biggest fear is that the G20 will not come up with a detailed communique, because it must be the result of consensus built within the G20. So you're unlikely to get critical issues, reaching consensus on critical issues. That's one. We're unlikely to get to get even JD Vance coming to attend this, even though they are the next host. They're unlikely to do this. They are starting to prepare to host their G20 in Mar-a-Lago.
Okay.
In Florida.
Wow, Mar-a-Lago.
They've already identified that. So they're going to do that. So I think the Americans will not participate at the top level. They will send somebody who will represent them, would have all the authority to take decisions on behalf of the United States, but it won't be at that high level. I don't think we'll come up with concrete, I hope we do, and that's my prayer, that we come up with concrete solution around the question of hunger and food security, which comes from the Brazilian. And I hope that there's some level of consensus to deal with how to reduce the global debt and how to deal with highly indebted countries, because they are caught up in this vicious cycle. They won't develop without a reprieve. And I think those two, and the resolution of conflicts, particularly in the continent, I think South Africa should focus on resolution of the conflicts in the continent.
So if you do feel like South Africa should play a bigger role in conflicts on the African continent?
Oh yes, I think South Africa has a big role. I think what is needed, in my own view, level, amongst others, is to look at how to finance non-governmental organizations that are doing a lot of work, like what the Thabo Mbeki Foundation is doing, to bring people to reach some level of consensus, to foster better understanding, because the only way to resolve conflict is for me to talk to you. If I'm in conflict with you, talking to you, actually we may end up agreeing that we have a lot in common than what divides us.
But I mean, look, it sounds great, right? But if you look at even recently with Rwanda and Congo, and then the DRC, there were many interventions held by African governmental bodies, and yet it seems they did not want to participate. But they could go to Qatar and have talks in Qatar. They could go to America and have talks in Europe and have agreements in the US. What are we missing then?
You know, Lebo, as a student of conflict resolution, and having looked at some of the conflicts in the continent, we are quite quick to talk about post-conflict reconstruction and development. We've never paid a lot of attention on issues as destroying the network and the infrastructure of conflict. That would include the war economy and everything that relates that fuels the
Yes.
conflict.
Yes.
So there's never been a similar attention to this issue. But as I'm saying, during the Thabo Mbeki peace and security dialogue, there's been a recognition that we need to start paying equal attention to destroy and dismantle the conflict infrastructure.
Itself, yes.
And that conflict infrastructure, the key thing, the drivers is the war economy
It
that
is.
has been
Indeed.
thriving.
Indeed.
That's why what's going on in the DRC, as long as the minerals that are being taken out by a variety, a plethora of actors, it will keep on fueling the continent, the conflict, because the infrastructure and the logistics is not disrupted. The minerals are reaching where they ought to go.
They keep going. They keep moving.
And life goes on.
In fact, they move better under conflict.
Exactly.
Yes.
As long as you don't dismantle that, you're likely to keep on seeing this conflict
Same thing
building up.
in Sudan. Same thing that you're watching many actors, sometimes actors on both sides of the conflict, because essentially it is about maintaining that kind of conflict. So the conflict infrastructure itself is what needs to be destroyed.
It's what needs to be disrupted. If you don't disrupt that, there's always the propensity to revert back to that conflict where the infrastructure exists. So they just move back into it and they fit into it. And if you destroy it, they have nowhere to go. So you create what I think is a no-return cycle, that you can't press a return button. If you press a return button, it's a default. It doesn't work. You need to do that.
Indeed. Okay. That's something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Makhubela. Keen to maybe catch up later during the G20 and hear what you have to say about how it happens and what goes on. But thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
All right.
Thanks indeed.
Bye.